The trade. The wind howled across the dry prairie, carrying with it the dust of a summer that had yielded nothing but hunger. In the little settlement outside Abilene, men and women gathered at the general store to barter what they could: hides, tools, grain, sometimes even the shirts off their backs. Poverty pressed hard on everyone, but nowhere did it cut deeper than in the life of Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen had been married 3 years. Her husband, Caleb, was a bitter man, hardened by drought and failure. He blamed her for everything: the failed crops, the lean cattle, and worst of all, her empty womb. "A woman's worth is in the children she bears," he often hissed at her when he thought no one else could hear. She endured it with quiet dignity, but each word cut deeper than a knife. That morning, the town buzzed with talk. Caleb had come into the settlement with Mary Ellen trailing behind him, head lowered, hands folded in front of her. She wore her faded calico dress, the hem frayed, her bonnet pulled low. The townsfolk whispered, wondering what kind of trouble Caleb was bringing now. He led his mule up to the store porch, tied it hard, then dragged Mary Ellen forward like she was no more than baggage. "Got no use for her no more," Caleb spat, his voice thick with whiskey. "She's barren. Mouth to feed, nothin' to give back." A silence fell over the gathered crowd. Women gasped, clutching their shawls tighter. Men shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to look her in the eye. Caleb's hand tightened on the burlap sack sitting on the porch. The storekeeper, uneasy, scratched his beard. "You mean to trade your wife for corn?" Caleb growled. "This sack'll keep me through winter." "She won't." Mary Ellen's breath caught, her chest rising and falling beneath the thin fabric of her dress. For a moment, she thought her knees would buckle, but she forced herself to stand still. If her husband was selling her like cattle, she would at least not let him see her weep. And then, movement from the edge of the crowd. He was a tall figure, quiet as always. The silent rancher. Folks knew him by many names. Some called him Ethan Cole, others simply the mute cowboy, for he had lost his voice long ago in some border skirmish no one dared ask about. He worked alone on a spread of land miles from town, kept to himself, never wasted words. Some folks thought him cold, others thought him broken. But when his steel-gray eyes settled on Mary Ellen, something stirred in the air. He stepped forward. His boots crunched the dust, his broad shadow falling over Caleb. Without saying a word, he placed his gloved hand on the sack of corn. Then, with the other hand, he reached into his coat and laid $2 silver beside it. The crowd shifted uneasily. Caleb sneered. "You want her? Fine. Take her. She ain't no woman, she's a burden. Worth less than the corn." Mary Ellen's breath shuddered as Caleb shoved her forward, hard enough that she nearly fell into the silent rancher's chest. Ethan caught her, steadying her gently. His hands were rough from years of labor, but the touch was careful, steady, almost reverent, as though he'd caught something fragile, something worth more than gold. He didn't say a word. Didn't need to. His eyes told her what his lips could not. "You're safe now." Caleb snatched up the silver and the sack of corn, spitting into the dirt before storming off. His mule clattered away, and with it, the last of Mary Ellen's old life. The townsfolk didn't know what to do. Some looked away in shame, others in pity, still others in scorn. But Ethan only tipped his hat, still holding Mary Ellen by the arm with a quiet steadiness. He led her toward his horse, a big black stallion that stood calm despite the noise. He lifted her easily into the saddle, swung up behind her, and without another glance backward, guided the horse out of town. The prairie stretched wide before them, endless as the sky. The wind tugged at Mary Ellen's bonnet, whipping strands of her hair loose. She sat stiff in the saddle, her heart pounding. She didn't know this man. She didn't know where he was taking her. But for the first time in years, she felt the weight of Caleb's hand lifted off her shoulders. Miles passed in silence. The rancher said nothing, as expected, but his presence was steady, like a mountain. His arm, braced lightly behind her on the reins, never pressed, never claimed, only guided. At last, on a rise, she saw it, a lonely ranch house against the horizon, with a barn, a few cattle grazing sparse grass, and fields that bore the stubborn green of hard-won labor. It was no grand estate, but it was alive. When he stopped the horse, Ethan dismounted and helped her down. His grip lingered for a moment, as though making sure her feet were truly steady on the ground. Then he gestured toward the house. Mary Ellen's throat tightened. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling with confusion and disbelief. "Why would you take me?" He looked at her, eyes deep with things unsaid, and slowly removed his hat. His silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something unspoken, compassion, maybe even hope. And though he could not answer with words, Mary Ellen understood, because no one deserves to be thrown away. She pressed her hands against her chest, and for the first time in years, tears slid down her cheeks, not of shame, but of release. She had been sold like an object. But standing on this dusty ranch, under the watchful gaze of the silent rancher, she felt the faint stirrings of something she thought she'd lost forever. The new life. The prairie mornings were quiet on Ethan Cole's land, broken only by the lowing of cattle or the crow of a rooster. The air was cooler at dawn, touched with the sweetness of sagebrush and the faint smoke from the wood stove. Mary Ellen woke in a small but tidy room, the quilt patched but warm, the floor swept clean. For the first time in years, she hadn't woken to Caleb's curses. Instead, she woke to silence, silence that was strangely comforting. At first, she moved about cautiously, unsure what was expected of her. Was she a wife now? A servant? Or merely another burden Ethan had foolishly taken on? But Ethan never pressed her, never demanded. He simply went about his work with steady diligence, leaving her space to breathe. The first morning, she found a basin of water set on the porch for her to wash, and a loaf of bread left cooling on the table with fresh butter. No words, no explanations, just quiet provision. Something in her heart softened. As the days slipped by, she began to help where she could. She mended shirts with fraying seams, swept dust from corners, and cooked meals with what little they had. Ethan always sat across from her at the table, hat hung by the door, head bowed a moment in silent prayer before he ate. He still said nothing, but she found herself speaking more, telling him about her childhood in Tennessee, about the sound of church bells on Sundays, about the scar on her wrist from when she'd fallen through ice as a girl. He listened, always listened, his eyes steady on hers, and she felt heard in a way she never had before. The breaking of walls. One evening, after weeks had passed, a storm rolled in across the plains. The sky bruised purple and black, lightning slicing the horizon. Mary Ellen hurried to latch shutters, but a gust nearly knocked her down. Ethan appeared at her side, bracing the wood with his powerful hands until it held. Rain hammered down, rattling the roof like drumbeats. Inside, the fire glowed warm, casting shadows across the room. Mary Ellen sat by it, her heart pounding from the storm outside and something else inside, an ache, a longing. Ethan sat near the hearth, drying his hair with a towel, his eyes catching the firelight. She swallowed. "Do you regret it?" she whispered. He tilted his head. "Taking me," she said, her voice breaking. "Everyone must think you're a fool. Trading silver and corn for a barren woman." His gaze softened. He set aside the towel, reached into his shirt pocket, and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. She'd seen him use it only once, when he'd written notes for supplies in town. He opened it now, tore out a page, and scrawled something quickly with a pencil. Then he handed it to her. The words read, "I don't need children to have a home. I need kindness. I need peace. You give me both." Mary Ellen's throat closed. Tears blurred her sight as she clutched the paper. No one had ever spoken of her as a gift before. No one had ever said she brought peace. She covered her mouth with her hand, sobs shaking her shoulders. Ethan moved closer, not touching, only waiting. When at last she looked up, she found him watching her with quiet devotion, as though she was the only person in all creation. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, but he only reached out, brushed a tear from her cheek with the gentlest touch, and then pulled back. It was more than enough. The seeds of love. Summer ripened into autumn. Together, they mended fences, branded calves, stacked hay. Mary Ellen's laughter returned slowly, like grass after a fire. She discovered Ethan's humor in small gestures, the way he'd raise an eyebrow when she burned bread, or how he'd tip his hat toward the chickens as though bidding them good morning. He could not speak, but his silence was never empty. It was full of meaning, patience, even tenderness. One afternoon, while they were driving cattle, a young bull broke from the herd and charged. Mary Ellen screamed as it barreled toward her, but before fear could take her, Ethan was there. He swung from his horse, planted his boots firm, and cracked the bull back with a snap of his rope. Dust flew, the animal snorted, then turned tail and bolted. Mary Ellen stood frozen, breathless. Ethan turned to her, eyes burning with concern. He grabbed her shoulders, scanning her as though making sure she hadn't been touched. When she whispered, "I'm fine," he exhaled slow, relief softening his features. Her heart swelled. In that moment she knew. He hadn't saved her because she was his responsibility. He had saved her because she mattered. Because he cared. That night, she lay awake staring at the rafters, realizing the truth she had been too afraid to speak. She loved him. Loved his strength, his silence, his kindness. Loved the way he saw her, not as barren, not as broken, but as whole. A new beginning. Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed the ranch, muffling sound, turning the world white. On Christmas Eve, Mary Ellen baked biscuits with what little flour they had left. She set the table, lit a small candle, and hummed an old hymn her mother used to sing. Ethan entered, dusting snow from his shoulders, and paused at the sight. "Merry Christmas," she whispered, though her heart still trembled. He smiled faintly, then reached into his coat. From it, he produced a small wooden carving, a bird, delicate, wings spread in flight. He set it in her hands. Her breath caught. "Did you make this?" He nodded once. She traced the feathers with trembling fingers. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Like freedom." Ethan reached for his notebook again, wrote quickly, and handed her the page. "You are free now. No one owns you. Not even me. But if you'll stay, this can be your home. Our home." Mary Ellen's vision blurred with tears. She rose from her chair, the bird clutched in one hand, and stepped close to him. Her other hand rose to his cheek, rough with stubble. "Ethan," she whispered, "I don't need children to feel whole. I don't need the world's approval. I just need you." His eyes widened, filling with something raw and unguarded. Slowly, as though afraid to break the spell, he lowered his head. Their lips met, soft at first, then deepening with years of unsaid longing. His arms wrapped around her, strong and sure, holding her like she was the only treasure he'd ever wanted. The storm outside howled, but inside the little ranch house, warmth spread brighter than any fire. Epilogue. In time, the townsfolk whispered differently. They said the barren woman had found a life better than any riches, that the silent rancher had found his voice without ever speaking a word. Together, they worked the land, built it stronger year by year. And though no children's laughter ever echoed in their halls, there was joy, peace, and love, a love that healed what the world had broken. Mary Ellen had been traded for a sack of corn. But with Ethan Cole, she had been given something beyond price, a new life, and a love that asked for nothing but her heart. And she gave it, wholly and forever.